I wanted to share this one with you. This was an idea that came out of a workshop I was in this morning with my mentor, David Boji. And what we were looking at today in the true storytelling frame of reference was the idea of different times. And there's this concept of chronos being the linear time that's almost metronomic, the actual linear passing of time, and this idea of kairos, K-A-I-R-O-S. So highlight that one. Kairos is a sense of timing that has to do with opportunities and contingencies and potential times. And so one of the things that happens all the time in storytelling, but also in life, is you get a literal understanding of what's going on in a certain event. So if that circle represents an event, let me draw that as a big blue circle. So if I had a particular event that had my attention, I might be in chronos time or linear time inside of that event. But outside of that event, there are derivatives of that event that we might think of as like follow-on opportunities that could be happening. So you have all these potential follow-on contingencies. And if you think about how we frame trades in critical states, what we're really doing is we're saying, in this moment of time in chronos, this thing could really go vigorously in any one of these directions, and they're all sort of co-equal in terms of, I don't know, probabilities or possibilities, but there's not really a way to favor one or the other or to put a definite probability on it. But they would not be surprising moments. And so one of the things that we do is when we set up a trade frame and we can define our risk very carefully, it's because we have a sense of the kairos, of the opportunity that's embedded inside of that chrono time. Well, you can now think of the event, this boundary of chronos, as being a thing that is bounded in space and time and context and local environment, and that the chronos is going to continue to move event by event down some metronomic time scale. And these are not really independent events, but each of these chronos, we can think of them as having boundaries or connections. Is it truly a solid boundary, or are these just continuous one big long blob of analog activity, or is it a semi-permeable boundary? And realizing that there is a set of kairos, that's possible on each of these. And so as we think about our Bollinger Band means, we actually can start assigning some probabilities to how extreme that kairos diversion might be that is embedded inside the chronos of a particular event. And so we can actually now, if we use some reflective thinking, we can realize now that what we actually have is not either chronos or kairos. It's really a combination of chronos and kairos, and that this really sets up an event temporal network in which each of the results of the chronos and the follow-through in kairos feeds forward to set up new possibilities wherever that event path takes you. And so there is a feed forward of learning and possibilities that, like seeds coming out of the past events, that's feeding forward into new possibilities. Then there is a lateral feed in which you realize that in this current chronos, it can go any number of these places. And if you have the imagination and the frame of reference to set up, you can actually see that in the present moment of chronos, that you are feeding laterally into the kairos options that are available to you as points of immediate departure. And so if feeding forward is talking about future possibilities, then a feeding laterally is opening up the options that you see available today or in the decision moment. And then feeding backwards, as we start seeing things unfolding from the chronos and the seeds that develop, we can actually go back and do reflective learning. And maybe as a result of the way price unfolded and the consequences, we can actually see deeper into the chronos and the event context. We might be able to now reinterpret what was going on in that past case study as a result of what we discovered through learning and reflecting as we went forward. So in every one of these chronos and kairos frames, there's the possibility of feeding forward, feeding laterally, and feeding backward to the person who can do reflective learning and acting. And so, so an event is what we would call, is the noun name for all of the things inside the local context of each of these chronos in the local ecosystem. And then the Latin word eventum is a verb form that says to do an event or to do eventing is actually, this is actually a verb, this activity and analysis and choices made and assessments made and analyses performed, actions taken and actions not taken. There's a verb component that makes this the dynamic process of a series of chronos events that have the feature of being both digital in the sense that we can define it precisely with boundaries, but also analog as a continuous waveform in the same way that light is both particle and wave. So that was today's learning, and it was a way to start thinking about the different ways that time manifests in our lives. Another way of showing that was this diagram, that one of the things that happens when you do framing is that you are looking at the chronos of the current moment and establishing your frame inside here. And then you are imagining places where it can be in the future. And then kairos represents all of these other potential pathways that it might take. Opportunities or contingencies or decision frames. When do we add a second or a third position? And so there might be multiple pathways with definable moments and decisions that we could take in many different ways. So kairos turns out to be that larger potentiality time frame that surrounds and embodies the chronos, the series of chronos events that take you from the past to the present to the future along a particular path. So the act of visioning and the act of framing and looking at the possibilities is what we mean when we talk about these frames of reference that allow us to estimate reasonably the path and direction and the magnitude that price might take as illustrated by previous activities and then modified and adapted through a statistical framework. So that was today's lesson from the true storytelling training that I'm going through with my mentor, David Boji. And I tend to always bring it back to both a soccer and a trading orientation so that I can remain grounded in the theories about sense making that he teaches. I find that stuff really helpful because what he's helping me see is how the stories that we tell about these individual chronos, the way we characterize the kind of trade that it was and the plot about the trade that we name and the what it felt like to be an actor in that story, the way we use stories to make sense and to carry forward our lessons learned, and then to digest those stories and to create a grand narrative, which might become our strategy. So the way that human mind uses storytelling in order to make sense out of all these things that are moving around is a subject of great interest to me. It helps us understand what we can learn and how we do learn and what the approach to learning we adopt is in different ways that it might be done. So I find this helps sharpen the tool. Steel sharpens steel. So I'm halfway through that course and really enjoying it. And the guys that get together on Saturday mornings in the story circle, we get to experience that kind of storytelling in an authentic way to help explore our inner space. And I'll have more to say about that later. After tomorrow, I have a one-on-one session with the boss to go into true storytelling coaching techniques, how to use true storytelling as a good ethical guide to help other people discover their inner space using the true story principles, but without projecting into their sense making. So I'm concerned about how to do that ethically, and that's going to be the basis of our discussion. It's one-on-one tomorrow. But really looking forward to that. I'll keep you posted. So I just wanted to say that in order to kind of get that out of the way and acknowledge where my brain is at these days. Well, let's go ahead into the 30-day review.